1983. At the turn of the century, Dr. Ansel collected over 1,000 specimens in the lower Niger and shipped them to Europe for analysis and for examination. So moving on, other researchers and other explorers in Nigeria continued to make expeditions, with the Niger Delta in 1905 by Robin Kemp, then Boyd Alexander on the Lake Chad Basin. And after the World War II, Paul Lowe collected some bird specimen and some data from Lagos. In the early 1920s, J.L. Bates report on bird fauna of Lake Chad, and that's the second time someone reported on the avifauna of Lake Chad. Then between the 1930-51, there appears to be the Bannerman's 8 volumes on the Nigerian ornithology, which is the first one of the most comprehensive ornithological book on the Nigerian avifauna. Then moving on, number of publications close on. Next slide, please. By a medical officer named Saleh, collected extensively on bird breeding data on various parts of Nigeria. And one interesting thing about Saleh is that one of the strategy he used in collecting extensive breeding data in Nigeria is looking for developments. So if you work, for example, in Lagos, after a few months, he will look for development to other parts of Nigeria, just for the sake of collecting breeding data and other bird data in Nigeria. So he collected extensively on breeding bird data in Nigeria, then followed by McLaren, which is also a fisheries officer. He studied shorebirds and recorded extensively on the shorebirds of Nigeria. Moving on, there is a police officer, also one of the country's most important egg collectors and breeding data in the history. So in 1957, a major event was happened, and that was the formation of the Nigerian Field Society Journal. And I provide the link so that people be aware of the society. It still exists, and a lot of materials, a lot of publications on Nigerian fauna, not only birds, and on the Nigerian environment. Then Peter Ward studied Quelea and pelagic migrants in Nigeria between the years 1960s through 1970s. And unfortunately, he even died in Nigeria as a result of disease. So another second major event was the formation of the Nigerian Ornithology Society in 1964. And the society metamorphosed in 1987 into the West African Ornithology Society with the bulletin journal renamed Malimbus. And of course, it was named after the Nigerian endemic bird, that is Malimba ibadanensis. Then Shaland in Kano collected a lot of bird data, especially ringing data. And in fact, he was the first person to undertake ringing, bird ringing in Nigeria. Then followed on by Dowsett and Hapson in Malampotori, which is an IBA in Nigeria, and unfortunately it is under the Boko Haram insurgency and no longer accessible by researchers. Mori also did write extensively and collected extensive data on the Nigerian birds in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Followed on, Hagam produced comparative nomenclature on Nigerian birds for the amateur in 1975, which is also one of the few publication in that time about the Nigerian birds. Following on, we know that Elgood 1982, before 1982, he published in 1964 about the birds of Nigeria, where he documented about 800 species. 1994, a reviewed one, Gustafsson et al. Also undertake some research on the birds of Lake Chad. So from 2010 onward, bird research by Nigerians has increased tremendously, and as a result of awareness about the importance of birds, and of course, particularly as a result of the establishment of the AP11 Ornithological Research Institute. Next slide, please. So Elgood has this to say, and I will allow us to read individually. Next slide, please. So I think we are good to take over. I think with the coming up of many nature enthusiasts and bathers in the country, I think we are good to take over. So it will be good to take an overview of the Nigeria and its avifauna. Strategically, Nigeria is very diverse in terms of topography and in terms of habitat types. It is, of course, located on the Gulf of Guinea, and in the north, it is bordered by the Sahara Desert, which is a formidable barrier for many birds that migrate. Yet a number of Nigerian birds migrate to Palearctic region to breed. And in the south, it is bordered by the Atlantic Ocean, which is also a formidable barrier to many birds to migrate. And of course, Nigeria is located or is situated within the Guinea Forest of West Africa, which is a global biodiversity hotspot where it supports range restricted bird species and other important biological taxa. So in terms of biodiversity richness, the country is ranked 11th in Africa, and it is ranked 22nd in the world in terms of bird richness, which is quite impressive. Next slide, please. So this slide presents the status of bird fauna on IUCN Red List in Nigeria. And of course, you can see that we have about 25 globally threatened species, which position Nigeria at the 51st country in the world. Then in terms of vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, or threatened, that's 3% of the avifauna. And of course, this is not comprehensive in the absence of national red list, because most of these accounts, or most of these assessments are based on national red list assessment and information supplied by individual countries. I believe a number or many common and widespread species could also be in great danger. Next slide, please. So when bird watching, a sight of majestic birds like a martial eagle, like a vulture, anyone, like some white stork or ducks or geese can be the conversation of the day. And why? Because a number of birds have vanished in Nigeria. Some common and widely distributed species have now become very limited in terms of population density. So seeing such birds while bird watching is such a great pleasure to any birder. And we'll see how some of these birds have vanished in Nigeria. So how do bird population look like several decades in Nigeria? So from this picture, it is interesting to see how these vultures perched on the roof of houses in Kano. And this was in the 1961, and the photo was taken by Harrison Foreman. So you can see how vultures live side by side with the humans, even though from the picture you'll see a small kid trying to persecute the birds with the stick. So this is how the situation looked like in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But if you can have vultures perched on the roof of houses, what about the abattoir? And we'll see how the situation looked like in the abattoirs in the 1960s through 70s in Nigeria. Peter Mundi in 1976 counted 300 hooded vultures in Sokoto abattoir. And this was a count from a single, it was from a single count in abattoir. And it was assumed that there were 1,000 birds in the area in the 1960s and 70s within the Sokoto city alone. In Sokoto city and the suburb, Alan Mundi and his friend Alan counted 279 hooded vulture nests in an area of 40 square kilometers. That's very, very small area on trees. And as he reported or narrated, as low as 4 meters exposed to people, sun, and wind. And in 2018, we carried out a comprehensive survey of vultures in northern Nigeria. We covered more than 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers, but we couldn't see a single vulture apart from this hooded vulture outside Sokoto in 2018. So you can read the report. I have provided a link to the name paper that you can read about the report. So the plight of hooded vulture, global population is estimated at 131,000, and finding shows that hooded vulture is the most traded species of vulture in Nigeria and of course in Africa, because this is the most common and widespread of all vultures in Africa, with the 90% of all vulture parts traded belonging to species in Nigeria. And in this book, titled The Days in My Life, His Highness told how his father and Serkin Power, who is the head of vultures, arranged to provide a white man without his knowledge with 500 vultures in place of turkeys for a dinner party. So you can imagine how the population of vultures looked like in the 60s through 70s. You can even source 500 vultures. So this is how these birds have declined. And the picture here shows the range of hooded vulture in Nigeria. You can see it is widely distributed in the country. In areas where the bird is locally extinct, that's where you have this rate. But I believe if the map is reviewed now, it will be amazing to see how the distribution range have shrink or constrict. Next slide, please. Another important birds that have vanished on the Nigerian landscape is the Rupel's vulture, and reports had it that it's nest on Kwatarkwashi in Selbag, which is a small rocky mountain as you enter Gusau. Reports had it that the Kwatarkwashi in Selbag was a nesting site for the Rupel's vulture, as well as other large birds like eagles in the 60s and 70s. The global population is very small. It's estimated as 22,000. As with most all other vultures, they are highly threatened. Main threat is hunting and trade for bleep-based use, medicine, and juju. And this is more specific to Nigeria. And from the picture, you can see the Kwatarkwashi in Selba, which is very popular and is something that you see when you are driving to Gusau. In fact, the species has lost more than 95% of its historic range in Nigeria. And you can see that from the map. It is considered critically endangered on the IUCN Red List of threatened species. Next slide, please. Another majestic bird is the great white pelicans, and it's one of the largest flying birds in the world. But unfortunately, this species have vanished on Nigeria's landscape. It used to nest in Wasai in Selbag many decades ago, and the species is hunted for food because it is large. And like with most other bird species that are large in Nigeria, they are mostly hunted for food. They are being persecuted due to fish depredation and used for traditional medicine in Nigeria. Another important bird is the large numbers of black crowned crane in the Hadejongru wetland, which is one of the first Ramsar site in Nigeria, and it's one of the 27 important bird areas we have in Nigeria. It is the Nigeria national bird, and the global population is estimated as 28,000 to 47,000. And it is believed that it is possibly extinct in Nigeria, although we haven't I don't think if any research has been undertaken in the recent past to assess its population. But we used to see a lot of these birds being hunted from Chad and bring into Nigeria. And there is a good number of these birds in people's houses as they are being kept as pets, aesthetics. In the 1960s and 70s, sightings of large numbers of the brown-crowned crane are common in the Hadejongru wetlands. And in like 2 years ago, I had a conversation with Serkin Dagona, that is the village head of Dagona town, which is in Yobe State. So he told me that when they were kids, it is very common for them to see like hundreds, 200 of this brown-crowned crane in the Hadejongru wetland around the farmlands. But unfortunately, they are no longer there. They have vanished completely in Nigeria. So primary threats include hunting, trade, and habitat degradation. It is such a majestic bird and beautiful bird. Another important bird species is the marabou stork, a majestic bird that was once common and widespread in northern Nigeria. From the distribution range, the range map, you can see its range, but the species has vanished. The species is nowadays mostly observed in zoos. If you go to most zoos, it's very common to see this magnificent bird. Main threats are hunting, traditional medicine, and persecution. and because it is being perceived as a competitor for fish. And 2 years ago, for the first time in the Hadejongru wetlands around the Dagona, one of the wetlands in Dagona, about 500 marabou stock were sighted. So in fact, some of the rangers there had to stay all night, 24/7, to guard the birds because they are being hunted for their meat and also for aesthetics. And there is a publication about the trade and belief-based use of marabou stock in Nigeria. And this is the first comprehensive assessment of the use of marabou parts for trade and belief-based use in Africa. Another majestic bird is the martial eagle, which of course from the map, you can see that it is obvious that the species was once widespread and common in Nigeria because it is also a resident bird, and it is considered the largest eagle in Africa. Locally known as Miki or Mikia in Hausa, was once common and widespread bird of prey. But unfortunately, it is extremely hard to see some of these birds today when you go bird watching or any other research. Threats include hunting and trade, reduction in prey abundance, and insufficient habitat because they require large territory to survive, to thrive. Another important bird is the white-headed vulture, one of the magnificent birds in Nigeria, yet facing local extinction. And from the map, you'll see that the species is almost extinct in Nigeria, even though it can still be found around the Adamawa and Borno axis. But presence is totally uncertain in Nigeria as per IUCN. And global population is also very low or very small, 2,500 to 10,000 mature individuals. Primary threats include hunting, trade, and traditional medicine. And because of the rarity of these birds, in 2021, this bird was saw in Maiduguri. And the locals were wondering what type of bird was this. And I tried to look for the photo that was shared with me. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it. I could have shared with you. So I think it was the first time I saw the picture in Nigeria. I have never seen this bird in the wild in Nigeria. Another majestic bird is the secretary bird, which once roamed the vast savanna in northern Nigeria. And you can see from the range map, it was once widespread in the country. The global population is very, well, I can say that it's relatively small, 6,700 to 67,000, and conservation status is endangered, and primary threats include habitat loss, hunting, trading, and lack of prey because the species mostly feed on snakes, and snakes are being killed and persecuted in Nigeria. And this could be one of the reasons why the bird has also declined in the last decades. I have not seen it in the wild in Nigeria, but I have seen it in the Tanzania Serengeti National Park. It is such a majestic bird to see. Yes, another beautiful bird, and it is reputed as the most majestic African eagles. Buffalo were once widely common from the distribution map. You can see that it almost cover like more than 60 or 70% of Nigeria. An estimated decline of at least 50%, or I will say even more than 50%. Now probably only found in Yankari Game Reserve. And of course, yes, we saw it last 2 months in Yankari, or 3 months or thereabout. But only 2 birds were seen in April and June in 2016. So it is very rare. And in 2019, I also saw it in Kayenji Lake National Park. It is such a beautiful and magnificent bird. Primary threats are habitat loss, hunting, trading, and poisoning, and it is considered endangered on the IUCN Red List of threatened species. It has also vanished on the Nigerian landscape. Yes, long-crested eagle. And I can't even describe, the pleasure to see this, when you see this eagle, or just look at this picture, Of course, we can we hardly see it in the wild, but it's such a majestic and beautiful raptor to see. Striking crest, hence the name long-crested eagle, majestic bird and found across Nigeria's landscape. In fact, it is found all over Nigeria, but the population has severely declined, and it is very rare to see some of these eagles when you go bedding. Main threats are hunting and trading for traditional medicine, as with most raptors. Yeah, of course, one thing that I want us to know is that like the long-crested eagle, it is considered least concern on the IUCN Red List of threatened species. That is based on global assessment. But in reality, a number of bird species in Nigeria particularly are locally threatened. I don't think if we undertake like a comprehensive assessment of these birds on our national red list, the long-crested eagle will be considered least concern. Virtually all our raptors will be considered in one of the threatened category. And this is four-winged goose, which is also one of the key geese species that is that have plummeted. Its population have plummeted in the last decades, and it is used to be quite common across the landscape. And you can see from the distribution map, it used to be common all over Nigeria. It is heavily hunted for meat because it is one of the large goose species we have in Nigeria. Other threats is used in traditional medicine. And of course, it is not easy to see some of these birds we are going to like Chad Basin or Hadej Ongru wetlands. You hardly see this bird species in some like small wetlands around cities. They have moved all to like large basins, like Chad Basin, like Malampotori areas, which are no longer accessible. Another majestic bird is the African fish eagle, magnificent raptor and found all over the country. African fish eagle are not true eagles, but belongs to Heliatus genus, which belongs to the sea eagles, like the American bald eagles. African fish eagles are kleptoparasites because they usually or habitually snatch prey from other species of food. Threats to this species are persecution, trade, and use for traditional medicine, as with most other raptors. And for the first time, I wasn't fortunate to see this bird in Nigeria, but we saw it last 2 months in Baturia Game Reserve, which is now National Park in Nigeria, and we have a picture of it, a juvenile. So it is a great sighting for the team. Of course, it is considered as a least concern on the IUCN Red List of 13 species, but we can't consider it a least concern in Nigeria. It is one of the threatened species we have in Nigeria. Egyptian vulture, one of the 7 vultures we have in Nigeria, the only migratory vulture in Nigeria, and the rest are the 6 are sedentary. That is, they are residents. Global population is very small, 12,400 to 36,000. Like all vultures, the species is used for traditional medicine. And unfortunately, if you go to market, this petty trade market, you will see body parts of these vultures, and they are quite used for traditional medicine, juju, and witchcraft, which is very sad. Other important threats are electrocution by power lines and habitat change. And because they are migratories, they perch on power lines, and therefore they get electrocuted and die. There is a small writing we did with Sam Ipande, and you can read it on this link about the Egyptian vulture in Nigeria. It is considered endangered on the IUCN Red List of threatened species. So one of the common species we see around but has vanished on the Nigeria's landscape and limited to protected areas is the helmeted guinea fowl, which was once a wild species. And up to now, there are still wild species in some of the protected areas we have in Nigeria, like the Yankari Game Reserve. It was once common in and outside protected areas, one of the most valued wild meats in Nigeria, and it is heavily hunted for its tasty meat, now restricted within protected areas. And this picture photo was photographed in Yankari. Another species we see around and still yet threatened or facing problems is the abdomen stork, Syconia abdimi, which is locally known as Shamwa in Hausa. And this species lives side by side with the humans and is known as a Habinga operant. And in the 80s, there was a song by Audu Uji dedicated to these magnificent birds. And in fact, he clearly stated that if you kill this bird, you have betrayed this bird because the bird is it doesn't do any harm, and in fact, it shows a sign of rain coming. And once you begin to see this bird showing up on the landscape, you should begin to start farming. So there is a song dedicated to this bird. But unfortunately, as a result of changes in beliefs and tradition and taboos, so this bird is also threatened, or I will say is haunted for its meat. And I was having some discussion with somebody who used to do some research in the Hadej wetland in the 90s. And he was in charge of the NCF facility in Hadej wetland, Malin Isadus. He made mention to me that there was a time when he went on patrol around Hadej wetlands, and he confiscated about 250 birds killed and smoked and ready to be taken to Hadejia market. So these are some of the predicaments that these birds faced over the last years or decades in Nigeria. It is also a species that is considered least concern in Nigeria on the IUCN Red List of threatened species, but we don't know what we will consider these birds in Nigeria until we have our national red list. There used to be a huge roost of yellow wagtail just outside the city walls of Kano. And Shalan, the first guy that ring birds in Nigeria, found huge roost of yellow wagtail in several reed beds outside the old city in Kano. And he ring over thousands wagtails in Kano and the surrounding environments. And unfortunately, this area, has been has faced important developments in terms of like filling stations, like damming of wetlands for one thing or the other for commercial purposes and other things like that. And unfortunately, I don't know if I remember seeing any wagtail around this area, but I don't think the area will support any huge roost of yellow wagtails anymore in Nigeria. Sorry, in Kano. So, but this happened in the 60s and the 70s. Another important bird, one of the majestic birds you, as a birder, you would love to see is the northern Abyssinian ground hornbill. And it is just like the Abdum stock, it is also considered as a Habinga or brain. It is locally known as Maibultu. And the village in Taraba named Maibultu is named after this majestic bird because there is an important population of these birds, as the locals said many, many decades ago. The area support a good number of this one, and the village was named Maibultu, which is located in Taraba. And it is one of those birds that have a very slow breeding, low breeding. In fact, in 9 years, they produce only one or two chicks and only one survive. So it has such a slow breeding. And it is one of the longest lived birds in the world, and it can live in captivity for up to 70 years. So in the wild, it can live up to 50 years or so. Population in Nigeria have severely declined and mainly restricted within protected areas. I have seen it once only in Nigeria in Kainji Lake National Park. But I heard that it's also occurring in Yankari, and we have had its call in Yankari, but I have not seen it in Yankari yet. Hunters kill the bird and use its top heads as disguises while hunting. So hunters kill this bird and use the head when they are hunting. And as with most large birds, it is heavily hunted for its meat. It is such a beautiful bird to see, and it's one of my favorite birds. It is considered vulnerable, yet we don't know what category we'll put it in Nigeria when we have our IUCN, our national red list. So I will end my overview of the vanishing birds in Nigeria with these magnificent birds, largest extant non-flying birds in the world, almost hunted to extinction in Nigeria. As from the historical distribution map, you will see that it occurs on the far northern parts of the country, all the way from Borno through Kano, Jigawa, Yobe, Zamfara, Sokoto, and Kebbi. But unfortunately, you don't see this bird anymore. Although account has it that it still occur in the Chungur Midugum of the Chad Basin National Park, but because of Boko Haram insurgency, the area has not been researched in the last decade. So we don't know whether they are still wild ostrich or not. Nobody knows. So what are the key take-home messages in this presentation? Over the past decades, the populations of many bird species in Nigeria have plummeted or become extinct. And this downward trend, unfortunately, will continue in the coming decades due to increasing environmental challenges in Nigeria. We have such a large human population, and there is low environmental awareness. And unfortunately, little is being done in terms of wildlife conservation and other things like that. And unfortunately, this year, Nigeria is considered among the top countries in the world having environmental disasters, looming environmental disaster, which is not a good news for us and for birds and, of course, other biodiversity. So as this downward trend continue, for example, by 2035, the number of hooded vulture, the most widespread of all vultures in Africa, will decrease by 67 to 90%. Of course, in Nigeria, I don't know by how many percent the species have decreased, maybe by 90 or even more than 90%. We have seen that in Sokoto alone, a single count in abattoir revealed 300 birds. And as Peter Mundi described in the article, he said that when you throw a piece of meat, the vultures will be between your legs like chickens. Narrated that in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. And today you don't see any vulture. You drive from Jigawa to Sokoto, from Kebbi to Yobe. You don't see any vulture. That's very, very sad. Although Nigerians are becoming increasingly environmentally aware, but the future of birds and other biodiversity looks bleak in Nigeria. So solutions moving forward with proper planning, I think we can do more. And implementation, of course, we have existing wildlife regulations. With proper implementation and execution of some of these wildlife policies and programs and outreach initiatives, we can also do more. And also by true commitment, we can do more. We have signed several agreements. We have signed several conventions to conserve these birds, to conserve our biodiversity, but there is little commitment from the government part, from the individual part, and also from the corporate parts. So I think we can do more, and a lot can be achieved to save many bird species. So also in that regard, we need to address human population increase, which is driving land use change, deforestation, urbanization, and other land use changes that affect birds and other species. We know that Nigeria is one of the countries having one of the highest deforestation rates in the world. And in fact, between 1960s to date, we have almost lost more than 80% of our primary vegetation. So which is quite sad for us. As our population continue to increase, we need more land, we need more wetlands to destroy, to cultivate for food and also for human settlement, which is quite sad also. And also people will have a high poverty level, and lack of awareness is also increasing to some of these factors, because people go into the bush, cut down trees, kill animals, involved in trade, just to feed their families, just to survive. So we need to address some of these challenges. Of course, it is a controversial topic that, most people avoid talking about. We have to tell ourselves the truth. We need to address this issue for us to see light, in terms of environmental conservation in Nigeria. And also there is a need to improve management of protected areas. A lot of our protected areas, are poorly managed. They are underfunded, some are understaffed. So we need to also improve management of these protected areas as with other countries in Africa. We can copy models from Kenya, East Africa, that they are doing very well in terms of protected area management. Also from Southern Africa, we can learn a lot from them. Also, we need to increase funding in research and monitoring. We need to prioritize, our protected areas, their source of revenues, ecotourism, research, and other things like that. Yeah. Also, we need to review our wildlife regulations. We need to come up with stringent wildlife regulations. You can imagine if somebody kill an elephant and he's being charged to pay like 400,000 naira, if you kill an elephant. That is ridiculous. You can't kill such a magnificent wildlife and be charged to court and you are asked to pay 400,000 naira. So we also need to come up with stringent wildlife laws. And although we have existing wildlife regulation, but there is poor enforcement. And also stakeholder engagement will do a lot in terms of bird conservation and other biodiversity conservation in Nigeria. We need to integrate the conservationists, the research practitioners, the local communities, the government at all levels, the local government, the state government, the federal government, and the non-governmental organization at all levels, even at international levels, because Nigeria is signatory to many conventions like Ramsar, like CMS, Convention on Migratory Species, and Iowa. A lot of these conventions, we have ratified these conventions. So we need to do a lot of stakeholder engagement to change the mindsets of Nigerians, to change the mindset of people about environmental conservation. Also, in that regard, we also address biodiversity naivety, that is a lack of awareness about the importance of biodiversity. You go to the bush, watching birds, do research on birds, and somebody will ask you, you don't have anything doing, you just come to see birds, you travel all the way from Duse or from Kano to Taraba, just to watch birds, you have nothing to do with their money. So we need to address the importance of biodiversity naivety. There is poor awareness about why do we even care about wildlife? Why do we even need to conserve these species? They have an important role in the environment, in ecosystem services, aesthetics, cultural values, a lot of values. So there is need to address this. There is a huge gap in this regard. So in conclusion, the conversation shouldn't always be about why and how birds are disappearing, but how individually can we stop them from disappearing? So I have provided some selected works that I have cited, and I sincerely thank you for listening, and I welcome observations, questions, and of course discussion, because this is an open discussion. I welcome ideas, contributions on how we can move forward. Thank you.